a painting I bought at a thrift store. It's 5 feet by 3 feet and 4 inches. I'm going to do my own painting over this, and I hope it turns out. I do this all the time, and I also use samples from Home Depot and Lowe's as my paint. It's a very inexpensive way to paint. I hope you find some enjoyment here. So this is how I'm going to start. I'm starting with 3 pencils, different colors, and I'm going to just scribble all over this painting. By the way, my name is Dianne Trabbic, and I've been painting since I was 4 years old, and I'm now almost 78. So anything is possible. There's no such thing as failure here. You just do what you can and hope for the best. This is my first pass. I'm using a paint, it's like ultramarine blue. I don't know if you can see that. And I also use a foam brush. Very inexpensive. The paint came from Home Depot, like I said before. And I don't care about the drips. I just let it go. I paint very thinly. And then while the paint is still wet, I spray it with alcohol. You can see that. It makes all kinds of texture. Anyway, you have to let it dry. I will get back to you the next pass. This is my second pass with a light green. I'll show you right now. Isn't this awful? I have a terrible, messy place to paint. That's the green I used, and it was a sample paint that I put in another container. I also spread this on thin with overlapping the blue, so I have overlapping shapes. I try to make my shapes go all the way to the edge, and larger shapes at the edges of my painting. Hopefully as it develops, I'll have some smaller shapes where the center of interest will be. And I sprayed this with alcohol also, and have to wait for it to dry. And I don't know if I mentioned this before in the other video, that this was a starving artist painting. I got it at a thrift store for 20 bucks. It's a lot of fun, because you don't have anything to gain and you have nothing to lose. You're just painting. And if it turns out, wonderful and great. If it doesn't, so what? Paint over it. This is my 4th pass on this. And right now, I'm using white paint. It's house paint with primer. And I'm filling in those lines I first put on in the beginning when I scribbled on it. I'm filling in some of those lines. And I'm using this old brush. I abuse it, so I have to soak it in alcohol just to get the paint out of it. And so I'm just filling in some of these lines that I made previously with the scribbles and trying to get a pattern going. And like I said in the other video, that I try to make my shapes go all the way to the edge. And I think it's starting to form a pattern here. Some of the original paint is showing through. And I just go around and fill in these little shapes that I made. It may turn out. I'm hopeful. I think it's coming along. I don't put alcohol on the white paint. It's thicker than the other paint. But like I said, you can always paint over it and start all over again. I'll show you the progression as the painting increases in volume and shapes. Not good at talking and painting at the same time, but I try. And I'm just making shapes. That's all I'm making. And hopefully it all comes together. And that's about it for now. These are golden acrylics. They're quinacridone crimson and turquoise. I use these for my darks. However, this is about, the last time I bought them, they were about 25 bucks a container. So that's why I use Home Depot paint. So I'm going to mix these two together at different degrees. If you want it to go to the blue, you mix less crimson with it. And it's like using phthalo green and alizarin crimson, but a little bit more intense. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting some darks in and see where that goes. I'm not crazy about the dark, so I've started to take it off with alcohol, which is all you do is spray a little alcohol on and take a rag and wipe it off. You can do this while it's still wet, and of course you get some of the color down from down below, but it's all right. It's all, I just wanted to show you that mistakes do happen. It just didn't look good. I think I went dark too quick. Anyway, this is what I'm doing. Well, I took some of the dark off, and then I added the rest of the quinacridone crimson. Just to get started with the darks. I think it's okay for now. I put it on kind of thin, and I sprayed it with alcohol. Hi, as you can see, I've moved from the table to an upright position. I'm not using real thin paint anymore, so I didn't want it to run. A lot of my paintings I let run and use the drips, but today we're not going to do that. And I also turn it all different ways to see which way it would go. So maybe that way. I thought maybe that way. And then you turn it this way. I sort of like it that way. It's a long way from being done. And then there's the last turn. That doesn't look too bad like that either. So I think I'm off to a good start. Whether it turns out or not, I don't know. I decided to use some charcoal on the painting to define some shapes. It's just willow charcoal, medium sticks. It's like vine charcoal, and where it turns a corner, I make it dark, and then lost and found line, just the old standard kind of thing. And I just find shapes and connect them, make the corners a little darker. Lost and found line. More interesting than a straight flat line. And then what I do, I just use cheap old hairspray. You get it at the Dollar Tree store for $1. And I just spray it. And it really fixes the charcoal. It doesn't smell that bad. It's not like a real expensive fixative. And then I go back in and I paint some of these shapes. And I think it's going to be okay. I now reinforced the whites. I tried to incorporate it all through the painting. I'm thinking now like a cliff wall, maybe some water falling. If you have to put a label on it, I guess that's what I would put. Cliff wall. And the next I'm going to reinforce that purplish color here and there. And maybe it'll be done. Who knows? I put the purplish color dark throughout the painting. I think I'm going to call it finished. I'd like to say at this time, my first teacher was my mother, Mary Alice Hummel, when I was about 4 years old. She taught me how to draw circle figures. And then I had art in high school. Later on, I had a very good teacher, Jean Wetzler. From there, I went to Monroe Community College and had a very good teacher by the name of Ted Vassar. And I've read tons of books. I've gone to countless workshops. And it's all up to you. You can have your painting critiqued and people will find things you should do better or different ideas, but it's really up to you when you have that paintbrush in your hand and you're making the decision. It's totally up to you. So I'm going to call this painting finished, and I thank you.